So I knew very little about paddleboarding the first time I tried it. I just rented a board at a local lake and found that I really enjoy it. But I've learned a few things since then. So here, in no particular order, are 10 things I wish I knew before I started paddleboarding. Number one is, it's called stand-up paddleboarding, but you don't actually have to stand the whole time. Or at all if you don't want to. I typically stand most of the time because that's what I prefer, and then if my feet get tired, I might kneel, or if I get really tired, I might sit. I find standing to be most comfortable for me because I can make minor adjustments to my body positioning more easily while standing. But if you only want to kneel or sit or whatever, that's fine too. Some paddleboards even come with a seat attachment. Number two is, if you do stand for long periods of time on a paddleboard, your calves will be sore the next day. Standing on a board on water is not the same as standing on like regular ground. Your legs and body are constantly making micro adjustments to help you keep your balance. Sometimes these efforts are quite big and you will notice it, but sometimes they're so small you won't notice it until you're sore the next day. Number three is, there are different types of boards and disciplines within paddleboarding. Most people tend to start out on like a recreational all-around board, and there's nothing wrong with those. They're fantastic if you want to paddle around like calm lakes and stuff like that. That's actually what I thought I wanted to do when I started paddleboarding, and I do still enjoy that, but I found there are other options as well. As far as boards go, there are a ton of different options. One of the first things you'll find is there are hard boards and inflatable boards. Some people have very strong opinions on which is better. For me personally, I prefer inflatable boards, but you should know they are super tiring to inflate. If you have it in your budget, I suggest buying a better pump than what comes with your board. If you basically always plan to launch from your car, you can get an electric pump, which will do all the work for you. If you plan to do more stuff in the backcountry where electric really isn't an option, then I suggest a manual 3-stage pump. Besides hard boards and inflatables, there are different types of boards for different disciplines. There are touring and racing boards for those who want to go further or faster. There are whitewater boards for those who want to run rivers. There are surfing boards for those who want to surf, and more. Number four is knowing which way to hold the paddle, and this is something that I think most people who are new to the sport mess up, especially if they're not shown by someone. Alright, so pretending I'm on my board going this way. So if you read online, it'll typically say something along the lines of, the blade should face away from you, it shouldn't scoop water, and it looks the opposite of how you would think it would go. So I originally had it like this. The blade's facing away from me, it doesn't scoop water, and that is the opposite of how I would think it would go. This is how you're actually supposed to paddle with it. I think a lot of the confusion comes from the fact that a lot of paddleboard paddles are not actually shaped like this. The ones that tend to come with a board are shaped like this usually, but if you buy like a specialty paddleboard paddle, they're usually like straight and then just a straight angle. There's no kind of double curve that this has going on. So I'll try to put a picture of an angled blade like that on the video to show you what that should look like, but for a paddle like this, if it says the blade should face away from you, it's talking about this top part actually. So if this is straight, this is angling away from you. Also, if you're still confused, look at the company website. So this is a Kokopelli paddleboard paddle. If you go on Kokopelli's site, you can see a marketing video, and they're using the paddle like this. So number five is, don't underestimate the wind or boat traffic. Depending on how bad the wind is, it can make it so much more difficult to paddle. There have been times where I was supposed to paddle like from here to here, but my route went like that because the wind was pushing me. And just because it's calm when you head out doesn't mean it will stay calm. The wind can suddenly pick up. So some tips for dealing with that: if the wind is bad, instead of standing, kneel, unless the wind is pushing you the way you want to go. Your body will kind of act like a sail, so if the wind is pushing you the wrong way, kneel down and create less surface area for the wind to push you. You could also sit to create even less resistance. And if the wind is like extra bad where even that doesn't work, I haven't had to do this yet, but if you lay face down on your paddleboard and paddle like it's a surfboard, that will also work better in high wind. And boat traffic, in my opinion, it's not nearly as bad as wind, but it does make paddling more difficult, especially if you're newer to paddling. And the tip I have to help with that is to orient your board parallel to the waves. So if the waves from a boat are in a line like this and moving towards you, you want your paddleboard to be facing this way, so you kind of go up and over the waves, as opposed to being parallel to the waves, because depending on how tall the waves are, that could very likely tip your board, or at minimum make it much harder to balance. Number six is a positive thing that I didn't expect, and that's the places it can take me that I wouldn't normally be able to get to. I've been able to get to some really cool waterfalls that I wouldn't be able to hike to, and that's actually one of my favorite things to do on my paddleboard is to explore new waterfalls. I planned a whole camping trip around paddling to different waterfalls last summer, and I was super tired and got sunburnt, but it was great. Paddleboarding has also opened up new camping options for me, which is awesome. They can be a bit harder to find if you're like specifically looking for them, but there are campsites, both backcountry and front country, where the only option to get to them is by boat. And that's actually something I'm planning to do more of this year. Related to that, if anyone has any good paddling campsite options, let me know. Number 7 is how much fun whitewater paddling can be. When I first started paddling on lakes, I never thought I would try whitewater. It seems super intimidating. And then last year I took a guided ducky trip down the Nantahala, and it was so much fun. And then like a month after that, I took a whitewater paddleboarding class, which was also a ton of fun. And that's something I'm hoping to explore more of this year. Something I want to note though is if you do plan to go on rivers, do not use a regular leash. You want to get something like this that attaches to your torso and has a quick release. Also, practice using your quick release before you actually like absolutely need to. Number 8 is something you don't necessarily need if you're like an absolute beginner, but it will help you improve faster, and that's effective turning. So when I first started to turn, I would just paddle continuously on one side and eventually I'd turn. They're just very big sweeping turns. To turn more effectively, you want to angle your paddle out like this. So usually you'd paddle like parallel to your board. You want to angle it out, you want to start towards the nose and then sweep back towards the back. And that will help you maneuver a little bit better. Also, what I found really helpful is something to play around with. You can just stick your paddle in the water next to you, kind of like as an anchor point, and use your core to actually turn like that. It sounds kind of weird, like it might not work, but if you play around it, you'll start to get a feel for it. Along those same lines, if you are trying to paddle in a straight line, you want to keep your paddle as vertical as possible while you're paddling. You don't want to be paddling out like this because you will start to turn. Number 9 is getting back onto your board is harder with a PFD than it is without one. So to get back on your board, you don't want to place both hands on the opposite side of your board and pull towards you, because there's a good chance you'll flip your board. If you want to put one hand on the opposite side and one hand on the handle and pull yourself based on the handle, you can do that. But you're going to want to basically float on your stomach perpendicular to your board and kind of kick or swim your torso up onto your board and then swing your feet around. If you start to get on and then like push down on the side closer to you, you will also flip your board. But that is kind of what people tend to do without thinking about it, because that's like how you'd get out of a pool or something like that. This is also something I would suggest practicing, and I'd practice it not too far from shore in case you struggle and can't get back on, but not so close to shore that you're gonna like fall and hit the bottom. And as long as you're practicing getting back on, you might as well practice falling. You do not want to fall on your board. It hurts way more than falling in the water. In my opinion, the best way to actually like practice falling is to test the limits of your board, and that will actually help you get more comfortable with it. So stand on your board and rock side to side, see how far you can go, kind of move forward and backwards, see how you can move that way, and you'll get a better feel for your board, and eventually you will fall, and then you can just practice getting back on. This is significantly more fun on a hot day, but if you have the proper cold weather gear, you can do it whenever. And number 10 is watch for branches under the water, or just shallow spots or rocks or basically anything that your fin could hit. You know how objects in motion stay in motion? Well, if your fin hits something, your board is going to stop, but you will keep going. And usually what happens when you fall is you grab on to whatever you're holding. So if you're holding your paddle, then fall forward, there's a decent chance you will smash your fingers in between your paddle and your board. Ask me how I know. And one last bonus thing, you would think this would be common sense, but apparently not. Don't forget your fins at home. I've done this once, and luckily have not done it since because I remembered that time. But I did it on a paddleboard camping trip. It was not a very fun paddle to the island. It was a lot of this. Yeah, so if you're going paddleboarding, don't forget all of your stuff. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to be always adventuring. If you're still here, please like this. I'm sick and this took a lot of effort to get through.